Hello, everyone. This is John S. Rhodes of the Rhodes Brothers. This is Greater Wealth Through Mastery. The topic of today's short video is Bitcoin, ETFs, and Coinbase. Now, an ETF is an exchange traded fund. It's a lot like a stock or a mutual fund that you can trade on the stock market. And it's a wonderful vehicle for some people to buy Bitcoin without actually doing something like self-custody, which I do recommend to virtually everyone. However, if you're just dipping your toe in the water or you're not able to otherwise acquire Bitcoin and do cold storage and self-storage and so on and so forth, then an ETF is a very reasonable vehicle for getting your hands on the upside, of course, of Bitcoin. And it's easily sold, it's easily bought, so it's very fluid, it's very liquid. Okay, more about Bitcoin ETFs in the future. If you'd like to know more, let me know in the comments below. However, okay, so here we go. This is what's incredible. This is what is totally wild. Coinbase has a system that allows these large institutions to move Bitcoin without creating any visible on-chain transactions. And to keep this very simple, if you and I were going to engage in capitalism and you had something to sell and I had something to buy, I might give you cash for your product and there's no transaction that's shown unless I get a receipt and it's reported to the government and so on and so forth. Now, if you use a credit card while you're going through a third party, Visa, MasterCard, the banks, money is moving around and it's easy for the institutions to see the transaction. It's on your credit card statement. You're going to see possibly movement of money with the bank ledger. You're going to see money move around and it's going to be recorded. So with Bitcoin, when you send money to someone, it's peer-to-peer. However, you can actually see the transaction. You can see that money, or in this case, you can see the Bitcoin move from one address to another. It's a bearer instrument. It's a lot like gold in that when you give someone a gold coin, they have the gold coin. Or like cash, like the first example, the money is simply moving and it may or may not be recorded. But with Bitcoin, the transaction is absolutely recorded in the public in most cases. Okay, so if it were you and I, and you had a product and I had the Bitcoin and then I purchased something from you, my Bitcoin would become your Bitcoin and I would get the product. Physical, digital, it doesn't matter. But it would show on chain. The transaction would actually show on chain and everyone forever would see that transaction. Bitcoin moving from one wallet to another wallet, from one address to another address, and so on and so forth. You'd actually be able to see it, in other words, forensically. If you were to go in and go, all right, do I see the transaction? The answer would be yes. Now, you might not know who the parties are, address A, address B, wallet A, wallet B, and so forth, but the transaction would be public. So what Coinbase has is the ability for institutions to move Bitcoin around and never have that transaction show up. So let's break this down. This is done off-chain. The money that moves around between Bitcoin ETFs and sort of in the plumbing of Coinbase can be done through off-chain or over-the-counter transactions or OTC transactions. So let's talk about the off-chain transactions first. That's when Bitcoin is transferred between two Coinbase users. It can be done off-chain entirely because the users that are inside the Coinbase system simply are transacting and the Bitcoin moves around inside of Coinbase. This means that instead of the transaction being publicly recorded on the public blockchain, the public Bitcoin blockchain, which everyone can see, Coinbase simply updates its internal records. In other words, the central hub, the central location of awareness and understanding of who owns and who has what Bitcoin within Coinbase is only under the umbrella and only under the jurisdiction and only under the view of Coinbase unless they wish to share that data. Which, of course, why would they share that data if it's a private transaction between two different parties or multiple parties and they're just moving numbers around on their own Coinbase internal ledger? Now, that's a rough way of putting everything. There's a lot more, technically speaking, that I could go into. But the key here is that you can have these off-chain transactions and there's no on-chain footprint that is left over. Okay, so that's what is going on. That's what's so incredible. And then you have OTC trading, which is over the counter, and that's large trades by institutions such as those by Bitcoin ETFs, and they often happen off the public exchanges, and these transactions are handled privately, allowing very large transactions to occur. And I don't want to go into the technicalities here, but the money, the Bitcoin, can move, most importantly, within Coinbase without anyone knowing who has moved what and how much. Now, there are forensic ways of sort of figuring out what Bitcoin is owned by what ETFs, which means what institutions, but it really, really is something. Now, here's the big gotcha. So come in close, pay close attention. 90% of Bitcoin that is within the Bitcoin ETF packages or the ETF structures, or the ETFs period, if you want to think of it that way, just basically 90% of the Bitcoin that the ETFs are holding is actually stored at Coinbase. That means that all the hubbub about the ETFs being a way of buying and selling Bitcoin and how it's enabling the regular average retail investor, exposure to Bitcoin, and it's safe and it's liquid. Well, what that brings up is a very interesting question. If the government wanted to choke out Bitcoin, at least for a while, slow it down, or go after what I've been calling the on and off ramps, the number one on and off ramp that the government could easily go after would be Coinbase. Now, they can go after various banks that allow people to move money from Citibank and Wells Fargo, JP Morgan, and Bank of America. They could choke off the banks from allowing money in or out, so they could go after the banks. But what better way to choke out Bitcoin than to go after the company that is storing the Bitcoin in its vault, in the giant wallets of Coinbase? Just go after Coinbase. So I do see that as a risk item. How big of a risk is it? I don't know, but it is something to be aware of. It's something to keep track of. And again, 90% of all Bitcoin ETFs are utilizing Coinbase's storage. And then the transactions between the organizations, and especially the ETFs, it's happening off-chain, outside the purview, outside the visibility of the average investor. So there is a concentration risk. There is a concentration of Bitcoin wealth, a honeypot, if you wish to think of it that way. So if you were, a nefarious actor, you might think about going after Coinbase as an organization, trying to crack into it in various ways, although that's very, very unlikely, very, very unlikely indeed. That is still a centralization point, a honeypot, something for the bad actors out there to target versus targeting other organizations. Just because I think it was Willie Sutton, if I've got it right, why do you rob banks? And his response was, that's where the money's at. So it's the same thing. If you're going to go after Bitcoin and you want to go after a big pot of Bitcoin, Coinbase might be the #1 target. Now they're battle hardened, they've been around for a while. That's not meant to scare you whatsoever. It's just to get you thinking about centralization risk and how these folks who are running the ETFs are doing things, behind the scenes that maybe you're not aware of. I think that's very interesting and useful, something to keep your eye on. It is possibly a true risk for Bitcoin and Bitcoin holders. That being said, if you have any comments, any questions, please, by all means, leave a comment below, ask more questions. Let us know what your experience has been, and does this resonate with you or not? What are you thinking? Also, if you've gotten value from this teaching, this training, this video, please pass it on. It really does help the channel grow. It's word of mouth referrals that really help this channel grow, and you are part of that. Thank you very much. We will see you in the next video. Take care.